Hey everybody, Steven here, and today a very special interview. I have Alex Ries with me, which is the creature designer for Subnautica Below Zero. Alex, thanks for doing this for me.
You're most welcome. Pleasure to meet you.
Yes, pleasure to meet you. This is our first time meeting. I've been following you on Twitter for some time now and just looking at all the art. It took me a while to realize also that you were the artist for the game. I was like, that looks like this creature, and then I started looking through your Twitter page there, and I was like, oh no, he's actually designing all of these.
Yeah. I got mistaken for a fan artist a few times,
Oh,
so I've just
really?
been doing the big art dumps, making sure I put in concept art we
Yeah.
produced for Subnautica.
Yeah, and with that, I mean, have you seen an increase? I mean, the game just released. Have you seen an increase in people following you, whether that's on Twitter or any of your other social media pages or anything like that?
Yeah, I try to capitalize it. So I sort of watch my Twitter analytics, and once it was released and the live streams and stuff kicked off, the graphs all ticked up.
That's
And I
awesome.
went on like Instagram and stuff like that, started posting things, trying to drum up interest, and yeah, everything sort of went up after that.
And
So
you're
there was
in,
definitely an increase in interest.
and that's yeah, that's good for you too. It is, and you're in Australia, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I'm down in Melbourne, down south.
Yeah, that's we had to work out the timing on this, just because I'm in the states and the U.S. and that's quite the time difference, I believe, because it's 9 a.m. for me. What time is it there for you?
Pretty much exactly midnight.
Okay, so a 9 hour
But
difference.
I mean, I stay up playing video games until 3 or 4 a.m. So this is like midday for me, basically.
Oh, really? So when do you get work done?
I'm so
What's
used to working. I'm used to working with American and UK clients, so I've kind of adapted to that because, of course, that's where the bulk of science fiction and stuff is consumed. So
okay?
yeah, basically, when I was working on Subnautica, everyone would start waking up as I was ending my workday over in California, where the studio is, and I'd get
Yeah.
my feedback and be ready to go for the next day.
So to kick this off, I wanted to start with, I mean, a pretty basic question, but I mean, how'd you get into the industry? What's your story? Is being an artist something that you always wanted to do, and what was the path to kind of get to that?
I always drew, so all my school books when I was a little kid were full, like all the sides of the school books were full of little weird creatures and satellites blowing each other up and that kind of thing. And so I drew all the time, but I was convinced I was going to be a biologist for
Okay.
years, right up until the final years of school. So I wanted to study deep sea creatures, particularly giant squid. I wanted to be the first person to film a giant squid when I was a kid. So it didn't end up being too far off of my eventual career trajectory. I
Y-
actually started working in video games in 2007. That's when I landed my first gig.
What was that?
Um, do you remember THQ when they existed?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was with THQ in Melbourne. I got a studio gig with a studio called Blue Tongue, and I was actually hired to do 3D. They didn't need a 2D guy at the time, but they wanted my art, so they said if you can hang on for 7 months, learn some 3D, and we can get you working on concept art later. So I came in and sort of got a crash course in 3D Studio Max. And I was doing like asset development and animation and stuff like that for like almost half a year or more before I actually got to start drawing things. And I think that actually kind of helped me because I've been able to
Yeah,
bring those
different,
skills forward.
different. And be like, hey, this 3D stuff. No, you, you 2D can come do
They're
that. I
like, yeah,
mean,
we like your drawings, but we don't need drawings at the moment. So if you can learn 3D, and I just like had a week to just, okay, let's quickly do every tutorial I can find on like 2007 internet
is
and just hammer
is
out a
something that
few
you still
A10 tank killers and stuff.
do you still use that? Do you still do some 3D stuff?
I do. I still use 3D at like when I'm starting off an image, like if I'm doing something complex like an aircraft or even some creatures with complex fin layouts and stuff, I'll mock it up either in ZBrush or now Blender, because Blender's, it's free
Yeah.
and it's getting better and better. I'll mock it up, pose it. I pose it up in Photoshop and then I paint over the top of it. So it's definitely useful as like you know James Gurney, the Dinotopia guy.
I remember looking at those when I was a kid. That's something that I had a copy of one of them.
That was actually my parting gift from THQ when we all left. So I lasted at THQ for about 3 years, but I think it's an interesting little fact. I actually applied for the job without looking to see if they were hiring,
Oh,
which
really?
is a kind of philosophy I've kept going. Like pretty much every job I've got in the industry, I've applied for jobs that didn't exist. Like Subnautica wasn't advertising for concept artists. Like Subnautica was basically wrapped. I didn't even know Below Zero was really a thing, but I really like what they were doing, so I found the name of the project director and just emailed them. And by luck have it, they'd actually heard of me already. So,
That's
and
great. That's actually
THQ
going
was
to
the
be one of
same.
my
I just
questions.
applied. Yeah, I think like it's worked. I very rarely get a job through the proper channels. Usually, I just apply to things that look interesting to me, and if they like your art, they'll reach out. You know.
Yeah, that's not something. I mean, I guess in my mind, I hadn't thought of that approach. It was more like, yeah, people see your art, you kind of put it out there, and they hit you up. But yeah, you're on the other end. You're just applying for stuff that you really want, and you're lucking out to get it. But yeah, that was one of my questions: is how did you land Below Zero? They weren't even looking, and you just were like, hey, I'd love to work with you guys.
Yeah, as far as I know, like I was just browsing Steam for like, okay, what games look good. I was already interested in Subnautica because as a creature designer, I thought they were doing things. I don't think I'd seen anyone do anything like what they were doing. So I just went on their website, had a look who the project director was, and emailed them directly. I didn't go through HR or anything. And he said, "Oh yeah, we'd heard of your stuff." And they had one of my artworks in the art Bible for the first game, like just something I'd drawn many, many years ago. As just like, here's how to push towards aliens.
Yeah,
So they'd heard of me. They hadn't thought of actually asking that. And so I think sometimes it's worth applying because, people are busy doing their work. They're busy in their area of expertise and they won't always reach out to you, but they get, there can be pleasant surprises if you do the reaching out.
yeah.
And in
That I
that
mean that
case, it
worked
worked
out,
really well.
and with that, I mean how so they're towards the end of Subnautica, they're thinking, and when I talked to Obraxis, we're like, we're already going to do this next thing, and initially it started out as just like kind of like DLC, and then it turned into a full-fledged game. Where are you in this
Yeah,
process
yeah,
in
that's
terms
how
of
it was
landing the
pitched.
game?
Basically, they'd already begun. They'd already done a little bit of content for Below Zero, so the product it was still considered DLC. I don't think the scope had creeped up to the scale it was in the end, but they had a bunch of initial concept art. They had some playtest stuff. They had some like assets in game to experiment with. So they definitely started. And they'd already had a bunch of like creatures concepted, and I was just sort of allowed to slip in there, meet the people, chat to them, and start. They basically just said, "Yeah, just go for it. Start submitting sheets of creatures, and we'll see like which ones work, which ones don't." And then I submitted that Titan Wholefish monster and a sheet of other bizarre things I thought of, and it just sort of evolved from there.
Yeah, so is that really, they're just like do whatever? So what's your process like? If somebody goes, yeah, just I mean, kind of make
Yeah,
whatever. Did
they
they
said
give
do
you some
whatever. Yeah.
parameters? Yeah.
Well,
Did they
what
give
I
you?
did first was I actually like when you work for the studios, like they usually want you to get up to speed. So they gave me a Subnautica key. I finished the game a couple of times, like really tried to get into the lore of it. So I knew, I wasn't coming in as a complete outsider trying to stamp my style over everything
Yeah.
because I really respected the work they'd done. And first I tried to think, okay, here's existing creatures from the tropical regions of the planet. How might they have adapted to the cold water? So I tried to use an evolutionary approach. So some of my first things were the snow stalker, where you've got a terrestrial version of the stalker. It's all covered in fur to insulate it. It evolved to live on land because I thought the limbs looked like they could probably handle that. So yeah, I tried to take an evolutionary approach and not just come in with completely random creatures because it's not really how life works
Yeah.
on a planet with a shared ecological history.
The one is your history. in, because you said you went to school for biology, right? Like
I
you wanted,
studied biology in my final year. I wanted to be a zoologist, but towards the end of school, it was clear, like I was heading towards concept art and science fiction art.
does that
Um,
serve you
I
in this
did.
process?
I think so, yeah. Because I kept the study up informally. Like I've got a big bookshelf, as I think every artist does, but I've got a lot of like, if you track down like secondhand, maybe just one or two editions old biology texts and stuff like that, and read through them, you find creatures and ways of like being that you'd never would have conceived of if you didn't. So I try to keep up to date with like what the latest is in extinct animals, like fossil animals from like hundreds of millions of years ago when you get really weird body plans. I try to look beyond just like mammals, like seals, sea lions, whales, things like that. I try to like bring in my knowledge of invertebrates and weird little deep sea creatures and apply that.
Yeah, it's always odd when I look at some of those, and whether it's reading books, magazines, stuff you find on the internet, documentaries, and you'll see some creatures, and you're like, it's one that's so far out there, like it seems like somebody dreamed it up, but it's not. Like it's real. Yeah, especially
Yeah,
some
you
of those
can't like
deep sea
there's
creatures.
an adage. You kind of can't beat nature. Like it's always come up with something far weirder or stupider than you could have imagined. And if you
Yeah,
designed it, someone would say this is just implausible.
yeah.
Like we've got anglerfish that are like 80% mouth, and the males are parasites that fuse into their body and like integrate into their bloodstream. And that would just seem like some sort of science fiction body horror nonsense, but it's perfectly real.
Yeah, that's stuff like
And
that always blows me
especially
away.
and that's still with invertebrates. That's still animals that are related to us. So you get even weirder when you start moving into the cephalopods with your squids and your like arthropods, with your like bizarre giant sea spiders where their bodies are so small their stomach is like partly moved up into their legs and things like that. Like there's
Oh
no
man.
end to the weirdness in the
Yeah.
deep.
Oh man. I always think of like, so me and my son, we watch a lot of nature documentaries, and like for whatever reason I'm
Got
fascinated.
Discovery set up and everything.
Yeah, like wasps for whatever reason fascinate me. Especially when
Oh,
they're
they're
more like
extraordinary creatures, yeah.
when they're more parasitic, or they're like laying their eggs in other creatures. Because we had some on our porch. We had two that tried doing that. They were bringing caterpillars up, and they had
Did they
created
have
like,
like a clay nest they were building?
yeah, and had a
We
bunch
had
of like
ones in
silkworms.
Australia, they collect spiders.
Oh, oh man.
So you'd
And
break open this thing and like paralyzed spiders would just spill out of every shape, color, creed you can imagine.
yeah, it's just, and especially when
So
it's
as you
like,
say, wasps are.
yeah, well, and the ones that like they allow them to live longer, like they don't paralyze them, like they let them
Oh, they
keep
don't
doing.
kill them, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, no, keep eating, keep growing, because you're feeding like my offspring, and then it's just gonna like burst from your body. Because I'm obsessed with xenomorphs. I grew up watching
Yeah,
Alien
like
and
there's
Aliens.
nothing in xenomorph biology that isn't done on Earth, like in some way. Like these xenomorphs are perfectly reasonable creatures. That's what's so disturbing about them, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's
Well, after
nothing they
watching
do that
that,
isn't done by some horrifying insect.
yeah, and then yeah, watching this stuff, I'm like, oh man, like, yeah, because you see it's real. Like when you're a kid and you watch it, I mean, it's scary as a kid, but you watch it and you're like, that's crazy. And then you're like, nope, it's happening for real. Like, and then it makes it
It's
worse.
happening every second of the day. Like
Yeah.
on like tarantulas that are paralyzed, dragged down a burrow, sealed in, alive, unable to move, while they're
Oh,
slowly eaten from the inside out. It's extraordinary.
yeah.
Like
Oh
it's
man.
it's it's easier to become it's easier to become an atheist as you study these weird creatures. You're like, oh, that's horrifying. Or God's got a horrific sense of humor.
Right. That's how like the community here, because I mean I'm in the South. That's not like, I'm in the Bible Belt in the U.S., and that's not my
Which
thing.
has a lot of interesting animals, I guess. Like, do you have fireflies down there?
Yeah, we have a lot of fireflies. Trying to
Yeah, that's
think.
something I'd love to see.
Oh, you don't have them there?
We have, like, I've heard we have them in some of our swamps, but I've never seen one. I went to New Zealand recently to visit Weta Workshop and rented a car and just headed out into the woods, and they have glowworms. So you'd look through the forest and you'd see these little like these little glints of starlight through the forest.
Oh, that's
That
cool.
was pretty amazing. But I've never seen glowworms or fireflies in Australia.
Yeah, the fireflies here, we used to
We're very
collect them as kids, and we'd put them in a big container, and then it just illuminate that whole container. It's like you had a lantern, and then we'd let them all go.
That's right. I've seen that. I've seen that in
Yeah,
American shows. Extraordinary.
yeah. But
But
other than
yeah,
that,
as you say, in the Bible Belt, there's not a lot of love for the this sort of evolutionary approach to things, I guess.
no. If I talk about evolutionary biology, because and I've talked about it on my channel, but I've been a personal trainer for 13 years, and I deal with
Hmm.
natural movement, parkour, something called developmental kinesia. Well, it's developmental kinesiology, but it's dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, functional range conditioning, all these different certifications that I have. And
And you've seen the way the human body's put together out of like, you can see the ancestry of the components. Like,
yeah, and then my degree's in nutrition, so you have to take human physiology and metabolism and all these things. And it's interesting because the
hmm
teachers are like, I don't care if you're religious or not, but what we're talking about here has to do with evolution. And this is how we present this information. I mean, just talking about for
yeah, that's true.
the the way the male reproductive system is compared to like a fish, and then going over how it got there. And now the people that I train with literally are building systems around evolutionary biology. Why is your shoulder the way it is? It brachiates for a specific reason. Rafe Kelly, creator and owner of Evolve Move Play, he's one of the best natural movement guys in the world, in my opinion, and he leans heavy into evolutionary biology. And I remember him talk about how we have monkey bars, but monkeys' shoulders don't move like ours do for brachiation, because a monkey's shoulder is really more like a cat or a dog. Our shoulder
Hmm.
girdle is more like an orangutan, so we should really be calling them orangutan bars. So this leads into looking to our counterparts and how they move and how we evolved through our movement. So why aren't we climbing trees anymore? Why aren't we brachiating? Why aren't we throwing? So this is something I'm just really fascinated with.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like I really should get a hold of it, like a really decent copy of Grey's Anatomy or something like that to really understand how all that goes together. As it
It's
stands, most of my books are about, I've got like squid behavioral biology and stuff like that.
well, if you look at
Like
uh,
focusing away from,
well, and if you look at
I think I've
uh,
focused away from humans too much.
if you look at a system like Animal Flow, for instance, those guys are looking at animals to see what benefit we could gain from their movement patterns. And it's also about play, which we just don't really do as adults anymore, really. We can look at Ido Portal and his system, which is more expressionistic movement, but he also talks about how we just don't play anymore, and all mammals play. When we look to the animal kingdom
Hmm.
here, when we're looking at mammals specifically, they all play, which is how they learn their hunting and survival skills, which is kind of weird now because now we're teaching kids almost not to play. We want them to be quiet and to not express themselves.
Well, I mean, they've even found evidence that reptiles play. There are species of reptiles that have been observed playing. There's fish play behavior, I believe, as well. Like, essentially, any animal that has to learn a skill that isn't just driven by instinct. Playing is
Yeah.
how they, learn their limits and engage with the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's one of those things like, why are we letting these skills go? Why aren't we continuing to do these things? Why are we just kind of throwing them to the wayside? But I mean, looking at what you're designing for like below zero, are you
Hmm.
thinking, all right, not only the evolutionary side, but like, all right, how does this thing move on top of that? And then that feeds into the design. And are you even animating these things, or are you just communicating to the team, this is how I think it moves?
I communicated the team. Like, I've done one or two limited little 3D things to help out, but it's essentially all 2D. And I try to provide as many notes as I can, like to make sure at least, if I've designed the tail a certain way, that the spine's moving in the correct direction. Like, the tail's not side to side when the flukes are clearly like horizontal, stuff like that. I
Gotcha.
try to add a lot of like little cutaways and little like detail shots to show how things move, how things open, things like that. And I do suggest possible behaviors. Like they've definitely, and I've found the animation team, they do seem to have a really good understanding of like sea creatures. Like they give these really nice playful movements to the creatures, like when it's appropriate. Like we've got those like seal-like pinnacarid creatures,
Yeah, yeah.
and they've got them zooming around like, you know, a flock of like sea lions, like, and
Well,
that just seems perfect.
well, and I know you said you haven't played the game yet, but have you seen, like, do you get to test any of this
I
stuff?
have
Like, cause
watched, I've watched a bunch of let's plays and stuff like that
okay,
to
because yeah,
sort of get
they'll
my head
follow
around
you
how everything's
around,
coming together.
like yeah, which is awesome because you can get. I did a video showcasing it when they changed the behavior, and what did I get? It was like 8 or 9 of them are following me around
Are
because I think
do they
I have
respond to
food.
feeding? Like, do you
Yeah,
feed them and then they sort of
yeah,
become loyal to you?
yep. And then they start following you around. Well, then one sees that and they're like, "Whoa, like he got food." So then it'll come over and it'll try and
Oh,
get food.
so
At least that's the
I
way it
was
worked when
always
I was
impressed by
playing.
the AI. That's not bad.
Yeah,
Like cooperative AI that takes notice of the behavior of like others around it. That's fantastic.
yeah. So, you're kind of giving the suggestions for the behaviors, taking the notes, and then you kind of see
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
later. Are you then giving notes again? Like I know with the Snow Stalker, like we had set
Hmm.
animations in game for a minute, and then all of a sudden, there's a good chunk of time where they even set up a separate area in the game that I would go showcase this stuff where it's like, all right, you have
Oh, okay.
hunting behavior, stalking behavior, how it reacts with its young, um, how it attacks you. Um, it gives like uh, well, it pops up on its back legs, which I thought was really, really cool. And then if
Yes,
you,
which is in the first concept I sent to them.
okay,
So the first concept I sent has one in the foreground and one in the background doing a sort of, well, what whales call spy hopping, where they sort of stick their head up out and get like a look around to see if there's like predators and prey and stuff like that.
okay,
Look over the low blowing like snow. So that was
yeah.
definitely a behavior suggested.
Did you
And that's all
suggest?
based on
Oh, sorry. Go ahead and finish.
no, go ahead.
Did you?
Basically that's based on, oh, sorry.
We're gonna keep doing. I think
Got
it's
our
the
phone
delay in
delay.
time too, by the way. But go ahead
It
and finish.
is wrong side of the planet.
Right.
I integrated a lot of polar bear behaviors with those guys.
Okay. So they have the spikes. What would you call that? Is that just on their back?
Now the spikes, obviously, they're carried over from the stalker from the tropics, and I included them as I believe they'd be a social display. Now
Okay.
I have to have my own sort of head canon, and then there's the game designer canon that actually ends up being written up
Yeah.
when you like scan them. So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
always a bit of a difference. In my head canon, they're for showing off socially. So if you've got those spines along the back, if you turn side to side to a rival, you look far taller than you actually are. They sort of increase the relative size of your profile. So I think, you know, a lot of dinosaurs and even like lizards and stuff have used that. Iguanas have that nice big row of spines along the top.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And of course, yeah, famously some of the I can't remember its name. Stegosaurus went really big on that.
Yeah. And
But a cold animal, you have to think, okay, would they be an unacceptable source of heat loss? Like if there's blood flowing through them. We're in the Arctic, they're not covered in fur, so you have to think, are they like horny structures that aren't actually vasculated and stuff like that? So I do definitely take that stuff into account. But the spikes in my mind, they're a sexual or social display.
have you seen the animation where they vibrate them?
I haven't, but I
It.
think that
I guess it's.
perfectly
I
makes
guess it's
sense.
growling. I don't know. To me, like it's like a growl thing that it's doing, but like the
It's
whole
kind of
thing
a sort of
vibrates.
rattlesnake vibe, I guess.
Yes. Yes. It's super intimidating. I thought it looked great.
Does it generate like is there a sound associated with the rattling of the,
It not.
because you can imagine all sorts of things, like they could be hollow with loose loose hard structures in them, so they rattle them to create like a sound. You can imagine all sorts of options for that.
Oh yeah. No, and I don't think it makes a sound. I think you hear the shaking in general of the body and that being part of it, but it's
Oh, of
almost like a
course, yeah,
low
yeah.
guttural like yeah, it's like a warning. And I think that one is
I gotta play it. I've played through the first game about 3 times now. The first time I got terrified of the Kara illness, and I had to do a bit of internet sleuthing to find out how to cure it. But
oh yeah.
you know, I worked
I
my way
got
through that.
I've
I was
told the
like,
story
I seem to be dying of a horrifying infection, and I'm panicking now.
right. Is this
And they're
game
like,
gonna
go
end?
down. I
Yeah,
thought, yeah, am I just gonna die of some horrific infection?
you're not even gonna beat the game, just gonna die.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I've told this story a couple times. I mean, the reason I got into the game is my son was watching CoryxKenshin and he was playing it in early access. And I'm not one to
Ah,
get into the
yes.
videos like that, like, but I'm watching and it's just like I was so fascinated, and then I got hooked, and so I get it in an early access, and then I'm playing it every day for hours and hours just because the map was so
Well,
big and just
early
exploring.
access, like the production team told me that early access essentially saved the first Subnautica. Like it's basically the reason it exists.
Yeah, it started
Like
out as a
they're
tablet game
co-op,
too.
like these. Really, is that true? Because I don't know much about the really early development, but I can see that. I
Yeah,
can
it
see
started
that.
out as
A
a
sort of.
tablet game.
I remember they said that streamers were a critical component in getting the game made. Like especially early on, like drumming up interest
Yeah,
because the game, of course, is exceptionally beautiful and it plays on a lot of people's fears of the deep and like untouched nature and stuff like that. So apparently, streamers were you can kind of half thank them for it existing at all.
yeah, and me and Obraxis kind of talked about that a little bit, and I
Hmm.
think I that was the draw. I mean, I watched that and I was like, I've never seen a game like this. Like,
I mean, that's how I found out about it. Yeah,
yeah,
found out about it on YouTube, watching people playing this amazing, beautiful undersea game.
yeah. And what was weird is the
And
second I hop in, I'm like, why hasn't this been done before?
well, I was surprised, and I think I probably would have run up against the failure too. But the idea of making a game where the goal isn't to kill and subjugate the wilderness you go into is pretty alien to people. Like people aren't really sure how to do that because we're used to games like Minecraft and other survival games and like Factoria where you basically go in and do what we did in real life. You destroy the earth to make as much money as possible.
Yeah,
But Subnautica doesn't really give you any. It gives you a couple of self-defense weapons, but you're not meant to go out there and wipe everything out and turn everything into a big monoculture farm, you know?
yeah, and that was
You're
the
actually trying to
interesting.
help the planet.
Yeah, and that was the interesting thing because Obraxis is like, I have zero interest in making games like that, and I was like, it is refreshing to see because, I mean, and no offense to
It's
the
almost unheard of outside of like the indie. Like there are a lot of indie games which are much more sort of calm and peaceful, but the big AAA stuff tends to be, and I enjoy that as well, of course, but the unquestioned assumptions about violence being the way to make a game and
yeah.
subjugation being the way to do a survival game, I think.
Especially for a survival game that is just so vastly different than anything that we've seen. And I like the AAA games also, but it's definitely like at
It's
a
nice to have a
certain point.
break, you know. It's nice to have
Yeah,
variety.
yeah. It's like, all right, I've played this game. I can feel it the second I hop in. I've done this game before. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but when there's something else out there that
But I've
comes
played
out,
a lot of Minecraft, and then I watched a little video that's like, let's like investigate this like colonialism associated with Minecraft. I'm like, oh yeah, I like forcibly relocated an entire village for my own trade purposes. I felled an entire forest to
right?
grow wheat. I killed the wolves off because they were attacking my sheep. I'm like, oh God.
What am I
It's like
doing?
I'm reenacting like the conquest of the West and like the destruction of Australia. It's like, oh my God.
It's
And
interesting with stuff like
Subnautica gives you like just it's such a different approach.
yeah, it's just like, hey, can you make it through here? And like in especially in the context of the environment, it's like
Mm.
the intimidation of the environment, like when you see the reaper for the first time and it's like, I'm not even going to go over here, like that's his area, that's
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
mine, like
And it's extremely difficult to kill. Like you have to set your own challenge to do it. It's just easier to let them do their thing, drop your decoys, hit full throttle in your submarine and just beat it out of there,
Yeah,
You
like
don't have
anytime.
to go in there firing a million high explosive torpedoes.
Yeah, and anytime I've tried to do that, it's like, all right, you got to use like cheats. You got to use like console commands and stuff like that to even
Yeah, like
do
get
any of that.
behind its head, like get it into
Yeah,
shallow water, get a knife, stab to death a thing the size of a blue whale with a hand
right.
knife. It's like, yeah, I don't know if this was worth it. Just let it do. Just let it live its best life.
Is that your favorite creature from the
It's
first
fun to.
game?
I think I'm often drawn to really small creatures. I think some of my favorite creatures. I love the reefback leviathan. I think that's exquisite. And in my early concepts, I tried to add like an icebreaker variant.
Oh,
But
really?
I think the program, yeah, I'll send the concept through for you for your video. But I tried to develop a version that would sort of sail along the surface level and break through the ice like an icebreaker ship. I
Oh, that's
think
awesome.
programming something like that with like the collision and the AI would have been an absolute nightmare. So it fell to the
Yeah,
wayside.
I
But
could see
I
that.
was really drawn to that. Like just imagine programming like ice packs and stuff like that. The first image I saw of Subnautica was the Sea Treader, and I loved the Sea Treader. Like you got your classic alien tripod, you can't really go wrong with that. Got these beautiful squid tentacles. They've got these little social lives. They're
I did
like doing big poops that you can use.
right for farming. Yeah, I didn't know
Put
about
in your
that.
yeah, you can put them in your yeah. Well, they're
I did.
so far away from the main gameplay area.
Yeah, I didn't. That's the thing. I didn't know
They're
about
like a
them.
little Easter egg almost.
Yeah, and then I finally ran across it, and it threw me off. Like, because I thought I'd seen most of the stuff in the game, and then it's like I'm gonna go follow the edge here, and around the edge I'm finding like Reaper Leviathans I didn't know were out there, and then I finally come across a Sea Trader,
Well, yeah, they
and
try. There's definitely that gameplay barrier where they're like, "Don't leave the volcanic thing because giant translucent worm death monsters are going to
yeah,
annihilate you."
the Ghost Leviathans. Yeah,
But if you just, yeah, beautiful. I think Ghost Leviathan's definitely one of my favorites as well. I'm really drawn to bioluminescent explorations, like the
one has got like
translucence of the deep sea creatures.
it's got like a scream to it too. It's different. It's like I don't know how to describe it, but it's like
I
that
think this,
scream.
like, I don't think sound design gets enough credit sometimes in media and film and game, but the sound design is wonderful in Subnautica. Sometimes funny, sometimes absolutely terrifying.
Yeah,
Like the Leviathan's cries coming when you can't see where the hell they're coming from, like
yeah.
wonderfully disturbing things.
But
And
yeah, the
hearing the little creatures in the reef shallows chittering to each other and stuff like that.
yeah.
Like I've scuba dived on the Great Barrier Reef and they're incredibly noisy places, and it was great to see that in a video game.
I wouldn't even have thought of that, to be honest, until you just said that.
No, if you like, water's a great conductor, so everything under there is communicating with sound, and there's clicking from pistol shrimps communicating with each other. There's like there's fish that use the pharyngeal teeth in their jaws to create language. There's like it was one of the noisiest things I've ever like swum through. It was extraordinary, like a
Yeah,
city basically. I
people
think capturing
like
that
dolphins.
was really interesting.
Dolphin, yeah, dolphins, and then I never made that action literally till you said, and I'm 35 old. That if you were, they'd probably be extremely noisy.
That have converted their entire bodies into a gigantic battery. And if you touch them, they call them numbfish because if you're a diver and you touch them, they blast your hand and you can't feel anything.
Whoa,
So I think including that bioelectric attacks is really interesting as well.
yeah, yeah. Like below zero, what,
Hmm.
especially since you designed and almost all the creatures, or did you design all the
It
creatures?
was a pretty good split. I designed a fair few of the creatures. I didn't design. There's that big whale, the glow whale, I think it's called.
Yes.
So that's not one of mine. There are definitely a few things that weren't mine. I designed the some of the more memeable ones, like the penguins. That was one of the earliest ones I designed that seemed to have become very popular.
Um,
I ended up designing a lot of cute things, which was unexpected.
did you design the peeper?
I designed the Arctic peeper, yeah. So the peeper itself predates my involvement in the project. I just added a little bit of an Arctic spin to it. I love
So
the peeper. I think it's really
did
adorable.
you see that they have the Peeper plushie?
I like the peeper plushie seems perfect because it's all eyeballs,
Yeah.
and that's what people love these days. If
I
My
have
Little
a
Pony taught us anything, it's all about eyeballs.
I have a 1.5-year-old, and she loves that thing. Like, because they sent me
Oh,
one, and then
that's
I have one to give
fantastic.
away. Yeah, she loves that thing. Um, but out of all the creatures
Have
in
they
Below
done a
Zero,
penguin one?
no, not one. I figured they were gonna do that. To be honest, just because
It
it
seems
does.
like an obvious one because, penguins have a sort of pop culture thing. They're kind of a known thing. And I
Yeah.
believe, like, I didn't actually name it, but I'm pretty sure the name is having fun with Benedict Cumberbatch, isn't it?
Yes, he was doing that documentary, he kept saying
That's right. And
penguin.
no one bothered to correct the poor guy.
Yeah.
So I was delighted to see the name they came up with. I would have come up with something humorless, but they can't. That's just, it fits it perfectly, I think.
And actually,
I
so
tried to balance cute with horrifying.
so for okay, so you didn't do the name for that one. Did you do the name for most of them?
Yeah, I did. I'd always put in a suggested name, and then I'd leave it up to the game designers and the writers to sort of have final say because, I
Yeah.
trust them given how amazing Subnautica 1 was. So the
So
squid shark, I named like that sort of thing. The frost dragon, the brine wing, that one's one of mine. I named that fella.
okay,
The Titan holefish, I got to name him.
nice. So out of all the whole game, what's your for Below Zero? What's your
Hmm.
favorite creature?
I think I'm really drawn to the Cheliceraid, that big red
Yeah.
shrimp monster. I really enjoyed designing the mouth for that thing. Like, I tried to make it as horrifying as possible.
So
As in terms of being proud, I think I really enjoy the vent garden.
yeah, I just did a video on that
Have you
yesterday.
explored that abomination before?
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
that biggest, it's like a level design creature, basically.
It's like a game within a game.
Yeah, exactly. And there were concerns about, like, getting clipping working. Like, you'd have to have a certain minimum size to make it fun to actually swim within.
Yeah.
But I think a pretty reasonably large response. People really like that idea of a world within a world, I think.
Yeah, and then
So I was proud of how that turned out.
I saw some of your concept too. I mean, there was a lot of good options that they had to choose from with that.
There was, like, I started off with something relatively small based on salps, these filter feeding creatures that fill the oceans. Gradually got bigger and bigger. I'd often had this idea that animals, like, the black smokers that Subnautica has lots of, those like deep sea geothermal vents,
Yeah.
like an animal that could sit over the top of one and just make maximum use of that, I thought would be interesting. So I tried to design something that would like make maximum use of that, and that's sort of where it came from. It's sort of like a hot air balloon almost sitting over the hot vent.
So
And
the
then I've always
juveniles,
been
right?
fascinated. Hmm.
Those are just kind of floating
I haven't
around.
actually encountered the juveniles, and I
Okay.
didn't actually design them, I don't believe.
It's basically a small version of what you have, but they're floating around, and my assumption was is that they're floating around to find their vent that they can kind of make their home over.
Because there were, yeah, I did a bunch of designs for the free floating ones, which I think would have evolved. Basically, the idea is a lot of the things that live within them can photosynthesize, so they'd head to the surface occasionally. Then
Okay.
they'd gather energy from the sun, and then they could sink to the vents to gather the mineral resources they needed for the different parts of their metabolism that weren't just solar based. Which is, have you ever seen footage on documentaries of that lake in an island that's just full of jellyfish?
No.
And people swim through it. I'll send a picture through if you like for like the
Yeah.
video. But basically, these jellyfish come up to the surface. They don't feed on animals. They have algae in their tissues and they photosynthesize. And at night, they sink to the bottom where there's concentrated nutrients that feeds their algae, and they just repeat that up and down cycle. So I think that was part of what was behind my thinking with this thing, that it would alternate between the two worlds,
That's
getting the
awesome.
minerals and the energy that it needed.
I'm so fascinated
And
when
I think it
people,
makes sense having the juveniles free floating because,
yeah,
either seeking vents or using the sun to power themselves. I
yeah.
think that makes perfect sense.
Well, and I'm just so fascinated when people have that next level of information like you're doing here, like the thought behind each creature, like you have it all planned out. That's so fascinating to me versus like, I don't know, I just thought it was going to look cool. It's like, all right, that's awesome. But somebody's like, no, it does this and this and this. And you have the whole thing planned out. That's really, really cool to me.
It's always about knowing your genre, I suppose, in concept art. Like, if you're in a horror film, we're dealing with supernatural monsters, you can go a bit crazier, but Subnautica, they're animals, They're not
Yeah.
monsters, really. So some of them seem monstrous, but they're just trying to make a living. I think something that scared a lot of people a little bit was the Shadow Leviathan, probably the most like openly horror based design I did.
Yeah, that attack
Dark
is is
shape,
is is
huge
gnarly too.
claws,
Yeah. What
that
was the
glowing mouth taking you in.
it's almost like a centipede. I mean, what was the kind of
It's based
thought
on a
behind
few
it?
real animals. Well, one it's partly based on something called an arrow worm, which are about 2 inches long, maybe. But if you look at them under a microscope, it's a living hellscape nightmare, basically. Their whole head sort of opens out into this array of blades that then grab what they want to eat. They hunt
Oh,
like baby fish and stuff like that.
ooh.
So it's I've sort of taken an animal that's tiny and a nightmare in its own world and expanded it. And as you said, I also incorporated elements of like big predatory centipedes and stuff like that in with the huge like grasping limbs, which is something that terrifies the hell out of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh
And then the
the
vertical mouth is always scary to people and really common in nature, like crabs and crustaceans and invertebrates. We're kind of the weird ones with our mouth that opens like a Muppet horizontally. Most
right.
animals don't really do
Yeah.
that. It's always
For
been a bit of a horror trope there.
some of the creatures, one specifically you brought up, the ice dragon, also called you called it the frost worm, correct?
Yes, I don't believe it made it into the game. Is that correct?
No, it did not, and that's been
I think it's too big. Like I can't
yeah.
imagine the clipping nightmare having that thing swim in an environment. You'd need it
So
in the open ocean stuff.
so that's the most common question, and I get it a lot on my videos. I know Danya gets it a lot. I
Hmm.
know Braxis. We talked about it on our interview, and he's like, yeah, you kind of get sick of getting asked that all the time because the fans are pushing so hard for it. And he goes, it just, and when he explained it in another video, I was like, okay, that makes sense. And we talked about it again,
Can
which
you
is like,
can you imagine this as you get into the shallows and the wing clips through your base entirely and the tail smashes halfway
right?
through an iceberg? And I
Yeah,
think it could work as a almost a human-sized predator though. Like it could kind of scale. If
that
we ever
was,
do a sequel, I'd definitely pitch it.
that's what they wanted. They said, because the notion is like, are you going to make another game? And they're like, we're moving on to other projects, but we would love to come back to this. That's kind of where they're leaving it. And
Yes,
the,
I did have a small part in the new project, but my style was just completely different. But
yeah,
there is hope for a true sequel, and if there is, I'm going to be jumping as hard as I can at that.
yeah, I think fans are waiting. I think they'll do it, but I know with this, he was like, listen, when you have a creature this size, you have to think about all the other information around it. Where does it live? Does that
Yeah,
biome fit
it's
it?
a pretty picture's a pretty picture, but
Yeah,
I'm extremely sympathetic. Like I accept, like it's just the nature of concept that I accept that most of what I draw, it can look as good as you want or as bad as you want sometimes. But
yeah,
if it doesn't work in gameplay, it's completely useless.
yeah, and that's what it boiled down to.
If the
It's like,
game's not, I think art comes secondary to gameplay. I think I'd rather play a game that's a bunch of blocks that's fun than a game that looks beautiful and is absolutely boring.
yeah, and
And if this design doesn't serve the game, it has to go.
yeah, that's what's the thing. Does it serve for the game? And they're like, we don't have a big enough space for it. And he goes, so just to
No,
throw it in there
exactly.
wouldn't make sense. And it would kind of do that to a disservice. So he's basically saying we're holding it and hoping to use it again potentially later. He's like, I don't know, maybe it shows up down the road. And Obraxis is very good at giving these like answers that are very open ended, so you never feel like you got like
Yes, yes, of course. Well,
So
people love that because then they can develop their own fan theories about why. Because it is fascinating. I love reading like fan wikis and stuff just for fun. Like I really enjoy world building, of course. So it is fascinating to go through the fan wiki and I see a drawing I've done of a sea creature for a totally different project, and it says, "Will this be appearing in Subnautica?" It's like it's something I did for a book that I
yeah,
was working on because like there's so much crossover. Like we're not sure if this is appearing because I even designed a big flying creature like a giant predatory sky ray, and
yeah.
people are like talking about it as if it's integrated, but that never went beyond the sketches
Oh,
because then you have
really?
to program a flying
Yeah.
animal that can pick up the player, drop them, isn't annoying, you
That
know.
was the
It's
kite wing sky ray. I covered that in a bunch of
yes, the
videos.
kite wing sky ray.
Yeah.
And I hope I'd love one day if it makes it in because I thought the sky rays were pretty cute, but I thought there was a lot more potential to make them horrifying.
I just thought that was the interesting notion to me was like, all right, you're going through the glacial basin, and not to have a bunch of
Hmm.
them. I don't think you needed a bunch of them, but like you have the stalkers
No, I
and you
think
have
that'd be a special thing in one
yeah,
area. Yeah.
and then just to have this thing swoop down you, it to me it was like I didn't see it, but at first I was like, that's creeper too. That notion that you don't hear it, maybe it's a snowstorm, and then it sits down and tries to attack you. But yeah, unfortunately, it
Oh
didn't make
yeah,
it
and you're
in.
just so used to dealing with things that you're like in the terrestrial environment. Things don't really come down at you, do they?
No.
You've got snow
Yeah.
stalkers. In the original game, you had the crabs with the giant eyeball on top of the head jumping at you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
didn't really have there were no really aggressive flyers, I don't think.
It's what had me excited about it. Yeah, unfortunately, it didn't. But once again, makes it into a future game, which would
Exactly, exactly. So those designs they sit in the vault, and if there's ever a call for them,
yeah.
then I go in because they're pretty early sketches. So of course the next step would be to do a proper design pass. I tried to make all the limbs and body parts correlate with the sky ray to make again it's that evolutionary thing. I wanted them to have the common ancestry, so they weren't just random monsters that had
Yeah.
appeared on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense too now. And I think the fun thing is going to be like looking to these creatures for people that play the game and like, okay, how does that, what was the thought behind connecting that to something that we had seen in the previous games or like the evolution of it to get there because you're dealing in a different
Yeah, exactly.
area. Yeah. Kind of moving on just a little bit. What
Yeah,
other
sure.
projects have you worked on? I know you mentioned a book, but and you mentioned working for THQ, but kind of what are these other projects that you've done or that you have coming up as well?
Coming up, I'm really pitching hard on a project about an alien species I developed called the Birin. So I've been working as hard as I can to get that up and running and just talking with some agents. It's, I guess, you'd sort of compare it to things like Dinotopia, sort of long form illustrated narrative book. As
Have you been
far as
putting these
work,
images on Twitter?
I have, yeah, I have
I've
been
seen
putting them
these.
up on
Yes,
Twitter.
these creatures are fascinating
They're
looking.
the sort of the four walking limb, two like grabby limb creatures with the sort of flower shaped mouth.
Yeah.
Like I've been working on this project since I was like a school child, basically. They used to be humanoids, pretty traditional. They're almost like grey looking creatures at one point, and they've just evolved continuously to
And
these
you're
to the
wanting to
current
publish
bird-like
this?
creatures. Yeah, I've actually written like a quarter of the book, and I've illustrated a quarter of the book. Now just doing pitching to agents. But as far as other work, I had an illustration agent. COVID kind of killed all that a little bit, but I was doing magazine work for like Australian Geographic, which is basically the local version of National Geographic. I was doing like space tourism industries or like maybe the life you'd find exploring Jovian moons like Europa's subsurface sea and stuff like that. I've even done the odd thing like makeup advertisements, like retouching like lighting and stuff like that. So pretty broad base, mostly video games though. A lot
And
of indie stuff.
and when COVID did hit, how did that? I know you said you just kind of had to do these other things, but I mean, was it a huge
Mhm.
downturn in work for you, or because most of the stuff you do is kind of you get to work from home, where you?
I was lucky because I was lucky because it didn't really affect the work we were doing on Subnautica Below Zero, and I was still deep in that. So I was a little bit insulated from the early stages of it. But all agency and illustration and bookwork vanished essentially overnight. And in fact, my representation ended up having to search for other jobs themselves. It simply stopped coming in.
How long did
People
that
weren't really going to
last?
bookstores.
Yeah.
It hasn't, as far as I can tell, it hasn't stopped.
Really?
But some agents, I've been doing agent hunting now, and it does seem to be opening up a little bit. I know that over stateside, your immunization program's actually going pretty well. In
Yeah.
Australia, like
Slowly.
in the city I'm in at the time of recording, we're not allowed to leave the property outside of a 5 kilometer radius. I guess that's a few miles. We're allowed to leave for maybe 2 hours a day. You have to wear a mask outside at all times.
Oh, so you're essentially kind of still on
It's a
lockdown.
sort of a what happened was we had months of a great time, but occasionally there's an outbreak, and then they do a week of like hardcore lockdown to sort of hit it on the head as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And
And then,
immunization out
everyone
there?
throws blame at everybody. It's very, our federal government forgot to buy enough. So I managed to, I've got my first injection. I managed to get in on mental health grounds. If you've got some like certain disabilities or social issues, you can actually get it early if you're
Okay.
like under 40. And I managed to get a note from my psychiatrist to get me in.
Yeah, and actually that's a
And
great
I grabbed
segue
the
for
Pfizer and got out.
yeah, that's a great segue too for something that you're willing to talk about, which I've wanted to talk to somebody about in the industry, and I know I struggle with it from time to time, but mental health issues just seem like they're finally getting some light and recognition, and people are finally talking about it where before it wasn't. I mean, certainly when I was growing up, it wasn't. And I've gone on medications before that made it worse, and it's like I can't do this anymore. But
Because I think we're about the same age, so we've kind of seen the same trajectory culturally.
yeah, yeah, I'm assuming
I'm
the
37, so I've seen.
okay, I'm about to be 36 in a month and a half.
Yeah.
So, yeah, with that, if you don't mind talking about it, the mental health
No,
kind of
absolutely
in the
not.
industry in general and what you've seen with that, and then
Mhm.
any kind of personal light that you can shed on that as well would be awesome.
It's interesting. I've kind of had a bit of a charmed response. I've never faced prejudice from it. I've never like been fired as a result of it. Like, let's take for example with I was working on Subnautica as the COVID-19 thing hit. I had a severe mental health issue and had to actually go into hospital. I spent a month, maybe a little bit over a month, in a psych ward. And Below Zero, the Below Zero team, so Unknown Worlds, was exceptionally understanding and compassionate. They ended up sending me a care package of
That's
like
great.
American sweets and stuff like that. And I actually managed, while I was in there, I managed to get a hold of I got a hold of my first like drawing tablet, like a standalone drawing tablet, and I actually did a little bit of work while I was in there, which was kind of interesting. So I never really faced the taboo. My family was perfectly open to the idea that mental health existed, and I sought help essentially immediately. It really first kicked in when I was a kid, so I've sort of been in the system for well over a decade now.
Is there something specific that you struggle with? Like for me, it's anxiety. I get like crippling anxiety, and then I can't do anything.
Anxiety is the primary thing. Anxiety with I think secondary depression, because obviously if you're anxious all the time, you get depressed.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of panic disorder issues. Like I'd go through periods where like panic attacks start to intrude onto my life, and then like I'll have a panic attack before I go to bed, which means then I'm terrified of going to bed. So I'll stay up till 6 a.m. gaming to sort of put it off as long as possible. Um, and then, you have issues with suicidality and like ideation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I guess I think a support network is probably the most critical element. If you're alone, I have tremendous respect for people who make it without that network. My family's been supportive, and in Australia we have socialized medicine, which means you can basically get free psych help to a certain level
Yeah.
if you really need it in Australia, which helps because if I'm self-employed, so you can kind of get away with not having private health insurance to some extent. Obviously, it can still get rather expensive in the end. I had to take out private to get access to the hospital system, the
Okay.
private mental health hospital system where you get, things are a little bit less terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and that's here. It's like some people, it's like they have no health insurance and it's like they don't know what to do. And it doesn't end well in those instances a lot
No,
of times.
exactly. You end up having to do like crowdsourcing, I guess. Like it's it's a bit cruel because the more popular you are, the more likely you are to get like crowdfunding support if you get into trouble. Whereas if you're an artist with like 50 followers, I don't know if people are going to see your GoFundMe as much. So I'd like to try and change that somehow.
Yeah.
I
It's,
try to sort of reach out to people who are having trouble and offer advice and send through scan and send through the documents and stuff that I get from the psych industry here where I
well, and
can.
there's an Australian guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but Kerwin Ray is somebody that I've followed for a good
Hmm.
while. And I mean, I've watched his
No, I'm
videos and
not
it,
familiar with his work.
yeah. Just watched one last week. We had a family member that was struggling a little bit, and watched that video and kind of passed it along. And he's saying, like, one of the guys was saying, like, I have crippling anxiety. I'm anxious all the time. And he's saying, I mean, anxiety as a child is because you're looking to the environment to feel safe, and you don't feel safe. So that's kind of like a coping mechanism
Absolutely.
within that. And he goes, so what do you think the answer is for this? And he goes, meditation. And he goes, yes. He was trying to figure out how to calm your mind, but also to tell yourself kind of that you're safe. And that was my big thing. I didn't grow up in a safe environment. So that's kind of where my anxiety stems from. But now it's interesting because I'll be completely fine, safe, and it creeps up again. And I'm like, why do I feel unsafe? Like, why am I having this huge uptick in anxiety? And
Yeah, just your amygdala is amped. It's ready. It's
yeah,
looking for a
yeah.
threat because
Well,
it's seen threats in the
and you've
past.
established it as a baseline. Like, you've done it
Yes,
so
absolutely.
much, it's normal for your body. It's like, this is what we do, right? And it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's not helpful.
And I don't
So
know if you've experienced this, but you can kind of be taken by surprise by when it flares up. It can flare up relatively rapidly into pretty debilitating, and it often doesn't take that much. Like I can have a
yeah,
night of insomnia that will trigger me into weeks of intense anxiety. Like it
yeah.
doesn't take much. It just has to trigger that specific phobia or fear you have. And
My
I've
mine's
found, to be honest, medication use has been extremely useful, if I'm honest.
and
So
that's
SSRIs and yeah.
and that helps because some people it doesn't is the thing. I've tried two different
Some people have
medications.
paradoxical response and get even worse.
I got worse, and so I had to
Yeah.
stop taking one, and then the other one, and I don't fault the medication necessarily. With this, they kept the insurance companies here, and this is like American medicine.
Hmm.
It kept saying like, "Oh, well, we don't support that dose anymore." And so the insurance company was dictating
Oh
what I
yeah,
could
of
take,
course.
and they kept changing it. And so when you change medication levels like 4 times in a
Hmm.
year, your body doesn't adapt to that. And so at one
No,
point,
of
it
course
made
not.
it so bad. I went to
Oh,
the
so the
doc.
insurance company's like, we support, say, 40 milligrams or whatever. That's covered by insurance, but if you're taking more or less, you're on your own. Is that how they sort of do it? Like,
Yeah. And so then you
this is
drop to
what's
40,
considered normal now.
and then they come
And
back.
they
They go,
just
hey,
keep changing the baseline.
yeah, hey, it's 35. Hey, it's 30. Hey, it's 20. And when they went to 20, and then my doctor was like, just double it. And I go, I can't, because he took my blood pressure, and I was
Hmm.
like 184 over 130, like
Oh,
horrible blood
wow.
pressure. Yeah. And I was like, dude, I'm not
Oh,
doing
that's
good.
amazing.
Yeah. And I was like,
Whereas I seem to, like, I can come on and off these things with almost no side effects. Like, it's very strange. But I did end up in hospital after it was a trial of a new drug. And So I ended up in hospital. So sometimes it goes rather wrong, I think. I found that SSRIs, they're ambiguous. There have been studies that show they are better than baseline for some people, but occasional use of benzodiazepines have been extremely useful for me during panic periods.
What
Of course, they're addictive drugs, which means they have to be used extremely cautiously.
what does it do for you? What does that particular drug do? Does it just like calm down the whole anxiety so it's just like I'm not anxious?
It slows down the rate of neurotransmission in the brain, basically. It calms everything.
Okay.
And if you get the dose right, you find yourself in a position in a few hours where you're like, why did I care about having a panic attack? And if it's you, I only do all these drugs are under the supervision of a psychiatrist and a psychologist, basically. And I'm terrified of addiction, which they said, if you're terrified, you'll probably be all right because,
Yeah.
if you're more scared of the addictive properties, then you probably will adhere. I found them really useful during like nasty panic periods, basically.
So let's say you
And
have
I have
a
found that
ramping up. How long are you potentially taking that? Like a couple weeks, and you're like, then I'm good.
it's interesting. Sometimes it can be a single day
Oh
because
wow.
sometimes it's a circuit breaker.
Yeah.
If you hit the anxiety at the right time with the right dose, you can smack it on the head and the body ceases to see a threat. But of course, it varies greatly for everybody. I'm talking about drugs like clonazepam, diazepam, things like that
Yeah.
that are prescribed. That I think they were initially used as like muscle relaxants and stuff like that. But I've definitely had luck using those, and I also do CBT. Some advice I would give is if you're doing something with your psychiatrist or you're getting advice from a counselor and it increases your anxiety and makes you feel like crap, say so, because a good psychiatrist, which was a revelation to me, was they will say, "Oh, that doesn't work. We're going to try something else." The
Yeah.
first person I saw insisted on just pushing ahead with the system they had. Like, no, keep trying breathing exercise. I'm like, well, I try breathing exercises and I have panic attacks.
Yeah. There's an art to that.
Eventually, I found someone who's like, oh, we'll try something else. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the big one. Like here, I've gone to
I think being
doctors.
able to be an adaptive person, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I've gone to doctors here, and they're like, one, he was just like, well, we can do this, and he tells me the drug, and I was like, nah. It was like, what's the
Mm-hmm.
side effects? And he lists them. I was like, no, I'm good. And he's like, well, what about this one? And I was like, no, I'm good. And I was like, listen, man, I really don't want to do a drug right now. And this was for
Yeah,
migraines,
yeah, yeah.
and I was kind of looking for
Oh, yes, that's right.
yeah, for Botox for my head
There's a
because
lot
I
of
want
very potent drugs for those, yeah.
yeah, and he was like. He just kept pushing to the next thing. He's like, well, then do this, then do this. Like, there wasn't like I want somebody that feels like they're working with me. And that's so important because
It
that
isn't
builds
just
trust.
pitching the free samples they got from the pharma rep that
Dude,
was
that's what it
over the
felt
last
like. It
week.
felt like I was talking to a drug rep that was
Yeah.
like, we'll just do this one. I don't want to do that. Well, then what about this one? Well, then that one. Then that one.
It's
It's like
interesting
talking
in
about candy.
Australia, although I'm sure there's plenty of corruption, but it's actually, you probably already know this, but it's illegal to advertise prescription medicines in Australia.
Most countries it is,
You
except for
can't,
the US, which is mind boggling.
it's just the success. They must have just such a powerful lobbying group. They make so much money.
Yeah.
So we never see, ask your doctor if this is right for you. It's like, nope, you can't do that. You can
Yeah.
advertise cold medicine. That's about it. So it
I wish
stops
it was
people
like that
going
here.
and asking a drug they think. Yeah, hopefully one day that gets
Yeah, well,
beaten
when you
down. But
list like, hey, do you feel, and it's like 5 symptoms that are pretty common
it's
symptoms
like
for,
it's the symptom that everyone has during COVID. It's like, are you tired? Yes,
yeah,
because I live in capitalism. Are you depressed? Yes, because I'm stuck alone forever.
right? Then come
Are
try
you
this
anxious?
drug.
Yes, because I'm aware of my mortality.
Yeah.
Try this drug. Side effects
Uh,
may include sudden death, may include heart attacks, excessive
yeah.
blood pressure, cancer. Da, 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 da.
Oh man, yeah, we're bombarded with that. It's crazy because then they show up on like social media stuff, and it's like, what? Like, why is this here?
Yes.
And when you're
I
bombarded
was
with it enough
wondering
times,
actually,
like,
it happens in our community a lot, like in the art community and the games community. How do you feel about things like there's like mental health day and stuff like that? How do you feel about that sort of thing? I certainly have opinions about it, but
I think
it always felt a
especially,
bit, yeah.
I mean, it depends on the person. I mean, I think for some people, like, especially if it's community driven, like saying mental health day and then it's like,
I
hey,
think
go
that's
sit
the
at your
key. Yeah,
house.
I think
Like, you should sit at your house because it's mental health day. And it's like, no, hey, we're all gonna meet up, like, and we're all checking in. We're
yes,
all gonna have a good
exactly,
time.
exactly.
Like, we're here to support each other, and that's what it's about. I'm on board for that. But if it's like, hey,
Yeah, I
take
think
Monday
using it
off,
to build community, I think.
yeah, take Monday
But
off
if it's
and
like,
be by
let's be
yourself.
aware that there are people who are unhappy, and then the next day you go back to business as usual. I think including and so yeah, to I guess to answer your earlier question, not to completely derail Subnautica into the horrors of mental health, but I think in the I think I found the art community very accepting and supportive, possibly because, among artists this stuff's not particularly uncommon. Um, I I don't know if I've been lucky or not, but I've had generally support. I've never had someone say, just man up and it's fine. You're just being a wimp. I've never experienced that, but I know a lot of people have.
Yeah,
I
that's
guess because the previous generation grew up with previous generation, like our parents and our parents' grew up in a time when psych care really did kind of suck. So you can kind of understand the reluctance to embrace it, like, calling them shrinks and stuff. They didn't really know what they were doing. They were still locking people away and stuff like that.
when it's weird in those
And I think
instances.
that taboo.
Well, in those instances, there is a previous generation where like, man, you just need to man up, and it's like, seriously, and it's like, well, I struggled when I was your age, and I was like, and how's that working out for you now? And like, when they think about it, they're like, well, yeah, no, I'm kind of still struggling, and it's like, okay, then, like,
Yeah,
this is what we're talking about, man.
like what does that mean?
Yeah,
And where does that leave women? Where does that leave
yeah.
women and stuff like that? It's like, woman
Hey,
up, please.
and the biggest
It's
thing,
like,
because I have kids, is talking to them about it, especially when I do
ah,
struggle,
yes.
where it's like, I might told my son this other day, and it's I get it. It's hard to judge because he was like, yeah, I was kind of feeling depressed. Now my son's 12, and my first initial jerk reaction
Yeah,
was,
it's hard to know what sadness and depression is, I suppose, at that
yeah,
age.
and I was like, dude, what do you know about depression? Like, you haven't
Is he
been,
on? Is he an online kid? Like I'm not a
yeah,
parent myself, so I don't know
yeah,
when kids sort of start going online.
yeah.
But I guess he's probably interacted with a lot of people who do. Their generation's far more open about this kind of stuff,
Well, and I also think he
which I quite like.
my son has extremely high EQ. Like, his emotional intelligence is high, so he sees people online that struggle with
Oh,
it,
that
and he's like,
poor
he wants
boy.
to relate, and he's like, oh, I have this too.
Mm-hmm.
So my first initial reaction, but I didn't say anything, but in my brain I was like, no, you're not, dude. What do you? But I was like, that's not your place. You don't know that. So I was like, all right, what's going on? Talk to him. I was like, listen, we're here for you if you ever need to talk to us. And so we got home, and we ran an errand, and I was like, listen,
Mm-hmm.
you have extremely high EQ. What I want you to do when you're feeling like this is come talk to us, but also there's things that can inspire you that I want you to look towards, instead of just focusing on necessarily the
Oh,
struggle.
yes.
I want you to find things that are lifting you up, not pulling you down, because it's so easy. It's like, I'm feeling depressed, and so you start, I know I can, like, you get into that mode of like
Mm-hmm.
looking at things that aren't really good for your mental health anyways, and it just starts
Well, you
bringing you
develop a
down.
tunnel vision.
Yeah.
You start to believe the distortions that your mind's feeding you sometimes.
Yes.
And it can be difficult to see them as distortions until you come out the other side, or unless someone's, with a lot of empathy and a lot of understanding can sort of talk you through it.
Yeah.
Because there's an irresistible tendency to believe your emotions aren't full of crap, but sometimes they're absolute nonsense.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to be afraid of, you know, going outside or something, like, but it feels logical at the time. It feels real.
Yeah. I
And you
always
can't
talk
always
about,
talk yourself out of it. It's very interesting.
I'm fascinated with the placebo and nocebo effect. and
Mm-hmm.
uh, listening
Oh,
to
nocebo. I'm not familiar with that. What's that?
it's so they'll do like a double blind placebo trial, right? And with one of
Mm-hmm.
them, they're usually giving them sugar pills. So the story I heard with this, it was like
Yes, of course.
this guy, he goes to the emergency room, and it's for an antidepressant, and he's like, I've taken all these pills. And so he took the whole
Mm-hmm.
bottle, and he's like, so they have to track down the doctor that's running this trial, and he comes in, and he's like,
Yeah.
because he thinks he's dying, his heart rate is elevated, all this, and he comes in, and he goes, listen, sir, you're given the sugar pill.
Okay.
So it's in
So
these instances.
nocebo is people who perceive a negative response from a placebo, basically, is it?
Yeah. And
Their
so
belief brings them. Yeah.
yeah, so when you believe, and it's like these people that believe, it's like if you believe that you're sick right now, you got a cold or you got COVID or whatever, if you believe it at
Mm-hmm.
such a high level, your body will start manifesting a response to that. And so you're going to start to have symptoms. And so I often think
Yeah, you
about
develop
that.
a what do they call it? Hypervigilance.
Yeah.
Because the human body always feels slightly wonky, and if you're hypervigilant, you're going to start tuning in and
Yes.
exaggerating those things.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're terrified, you overdosed on pills, your heart rate and your blood pressure is going to go up,
Yep.
which you then interpret as being caused by the pills, which then increases your heart rate and blood pressure.
Yep. And then you have this positive
So
feedback loop.
Yes, of course, absolutely. Which I think essentially is what a panic attack is. It's a
Yes.
feedback loop of fear, and a panic attack. It's interesting. It's interesting to learn about panic attacks because someone who's skydiving and loving it is having a panic attack, but they're enjoying it.
Yeah, there's
While
this
someone with
euphoria
anxiety
that they're
isn't.
getting from it.
It's like context dependent. Like a massive adrenaline dump can be interpreted as a nightmare or the greatest experience of your life.
Yeah.
And it's the learning that context is so important to these feelings was kind of interesting as well.
And well, and I mean, my degree is in nutrition. I'm obsessed with health, and Robert Sapolsky is a stress physiologist.
Did you come in from the sort of sports science side of things?
I was in high school. I got into weightlifting and stuff like that, and then started doing some sports. And then it was just like I actually started out as wanting to do conceptual art for video games. Believe it or not, I went to the Art Institute of Seattle. My son was born, and then it was
they
like
charge you about $20,000 a year.
no, dude, such a ripoff. And so at that point, we had my son Caleb, and I was just like, I can't be in a position where I'm worrying all the time about where my next paycheck's going to come from, because I'm going to be with this company for a couple years, and then I got to go over here. It's too much. I was like, and at that point, health was such a big kind of pillar in my life. I was working out all the time. I was like, I want to lean into this. So I started that, and I've carried forward with it since.
There's always a market for it, you know?
Yes.
People are always going to need health information and training. So
yep. And so, and now I work for myself. I have my own studio. I'm actually now going to sign me and Dr. John, who's a chiropractor in town. We've done certifications together. So it's not just like a pop you and leave you. He does muscle testing, a whole bunch of other stuff. We're actually starting our own studio.
Oh, wow. Like does he do like electrical conductivity testing and stuff like that?
He'll do not
like nerve conductivity and stuff.
He can do that without needing a tool based off of the DNS stuff. Yeah. And he has more certs than most trainers I know around town. He's better than a lot of the physical therapists that I've studied under here, actually.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So got into that realm, and I've been in it ever since. But I do this thing where I'll read, like I read Robert Sapolsky's book, and I'm getting stressed out reading it. And it's about stress physiology. And the big thing about stress that I tell my clients... Well,
that can be a big thing, yeah.
Yeah.
It can be very difficult to get psychiatric patients to read about the condition because it's, to borrow a word, triggering, essentially.
Yeah. And I read a gastroenterological
enterologist.
Well, it's the book that you have to read to take your MCATs. It's the book that you have to
Oh,
take to
okay.
read to be a doctor. And I'm just like reading this
And
stuff all
is
the
it
time.
essentially endless nightmares that can happen with your guts?
Not necessarily. It's literally the physiology side, and then it starts bringing up. All right, this problem
Oh, okay.
happens. Here's why it's
Hmm.
breaking down. Here's why you get, let's say you get stomach cancer. Well, what's the process of leading into that
Mm.
physiologically, right? And so I'm reading that, and it's like, okay, now I'm getting stomach issues. Like, so I was like, all right, I got to
Hmm.
stop reading these books. But reading his stress physiology book, he's like, if we took the blood work of a lion and a gazelle, he goes like, what do you think the difference would be? And most people are going to say that the gazelle is going to be more stressed out because it's being chased. And he goes, they would look identical. Your body doesn't know the difference
Oh.
when it comes to stress. When you have a stress response, that's what it is, a stress response. So the blood work's going to
Yeah,
look
that's why
exactly the same. Yeah.
when
And so,
alpha males talk about would you rather be the wolf or the sheep, I'm like, I split the difference. The wolves like basically live extremely stressful lives fighting border fights, whereas most sheep, I don't know, they chill out and eat food. They live in big
right?
communities. I mean, maybe being
So
the wolf's not so great, you know?
So he goes, when it comes to mammals though, the big thing is because he studies baboons. He goes,
Hmm.
hierarchy
Oh,
is the
wow.
big
Okay.
thing. He goes, so if you're the
Because they live
head,
in big social groups, don't they?
yes, and he goes, if you're the head baboon, you're literally going to be the
Hmm.
most stressed out, and if you're bottom of the totem pole,
Oh,
you will be.
fascinating.
He goes, but if you're right in the middle, he goes, you have good social connections with your offspring, with your mates,
Hmm.
you have friends. He goes, literally, you'll probably live the longest. But he goes, those two. And he goes, the bottom is always trying to be subservient to those above it. And it's getting obviously
Hmm.
wailed on a lot. It's getting picked on a lot. And then if you're at the top, you're always trying to maintain your place, which means that you're constantly running around trying to put people in check.
Well, I mean,
It's
did Trump seem happier being president, you know? Didn't Obama famously go grey very rapidly when he got the
right, right.
presidency?
Most presidents do.
It's because you're fighting off everyone who wants your position from below, and as you say with baboons, like eventually they get their ass kicked by a young up and comer and are cast out. It's not a fun position to be in, really.
No,
They're just
no.
driven. We're driven to it. Some of us are driven to it by instinct, but it's kind of better to be in the middle somewhere, as you say.
Yeah, and
And
for
when I worked in food service and stuff coming up, and I'd occasionally refuse a promotion because I didn't want. I was just, I was just earning some money. I didn't necessarily want to have that responsibility. It was much easier to be someone in the middle.
yeah.
But I suppose we're taught to always aim for the top, to
Well,
always
not
take the promotion, to always head upwards.
yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, is that going to make you happy or not? And that's where that's kind of my north star, so to speak, right now. Is it going to ultimately make me happy? And if it's not, then taking on the extra stuff and doing the extra, like that's not because I think it always
I've seen
comes
it
at a
happen in art
cost.
a lot, actually. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Really?
it does. It does. It's not free. It happens in art a lot because if you become an art director or something, a lot of my friends who did then lament, I haven't drawn in about 6 months because I'm just constantly monitoring what everyone else is drawing and directing, and they lose contact with that. And I've seen people take demotions to get back into actually making things.
Yeah, and especially if that's your passion, it's
Because
like that's got to
yeah, exactly.
feel like it's
Exactly.
taking part of you away.
Exactly. Like I quite like being a concept artist. Being an art director can be interesting, but as you say, if the game falls on its ass, it's can be kind of on you, and there's other things to take into account with
It,
heading upwards, You have to be willing to take on the extra stress.
so for you, is it like I think I'm going to be freelance, like that's my career. I don't.
I do love being freelance, but I'm staying to it. Like I've been reaching out to Weta Workshop and people like that, and especially with the book that I'm working on, where you're essentially the art director and main content producer. As I've got older, I've been more willing to sort of aim a little bit higher because if you really want to achieve certain things, sometimes the sacrifices are worth it.
Yeah, I did mention
But you have to balance. You have to balance that, of course.
balance is hard for me, man. And I
You have to
mentioned
balance it against your psychological limitations.
yeah, and I mentioned I have a publishing company, and I say publishing company. It's called Oddball Publishing, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just me and a buddy, best friend from high school, writing partner, local
Mm-hmm.
artist Zach Raw. I mean, and the big thing for us is like the zombie book series. Color Me Zombie is the first one, and it's a zombie bedtime story. And then we have Undyed Nightmare, and then we have Paranormal.
Ooh. Is this like
Paranormal
YA aimed, or is this adult? Like, is this more comedy angle stuff?
This is and
Or is
actually
it
the
dead
main character
serious?
is my son. So this is zombie books for
nice.
kids. Yeah, and we have a witch book series
Ah.
called Intertwined: A Witch's Fable. We did a sock book,
Oh,
Adventure of the
lovely.
Lost Sock. Yeah, and it's the balance of like, I don't need to make money off of this. I just want to do it because I love it, and that's been a real joy
There's
to do
nothing
those.
more. There's no greater blessing than like a separate income stream to your passion project.
Yes, that's why like
If
people
you can
like.
make that work, wow.
Yeah, people like, you do YouTube full time. It's like, no, sir. It's like, I train full time because that is my I don't know if I could ever quit because I love it, but I also love this.
Yes, yes.
Like, so do you have anything like that, by the way? I know art is your thing, but do you have any other stuff that you kind of dabble in?
I dabble in lots of. Well, is this the kind of thing you're looking for? Like making models, animal keeping? I've got a lot of animal keeping,
Yeah,
but that's
I
not
mean,
really
whatever your
like
passion
public
is, I think could be your
facing
thing.
stuff.
Yeah.
I've got a marine aquarium. It's all planted out with like macroalgae and like weird little like. Well, interestingly enough, because it's a marine tank, and a lot of artists don't know stuff like this, but you're using this as reference material, and if you're a freelancer, a lot of it's tax deductible. So I would definitely encourage people in freelance to like look very closely at their accounts, because when I'm working on Subnautica, I'm literally taking photos of the fish in my tank and using them as reference material. So there is some crossover. I've got a pet bearded dragon who hangs out in my room.
My son
Sort
has
of
one.
got free range. Yeah, they're fantastic. They're very
Yeah.
easy to get in Australia. I understand in America, obviously they cut off the trade, so it gets a bit more complicated.
They had a
I
convention
found them very
here.
charming creatures.
They had a convention where I'm at.
Were
Like
they
they
like
went down there.
reasonably priced? Like, was it
I
ridiculous?
don't know because it was a gift. My
Oh, lovely.
niece, yeah, her boyfriend has a bunch of lizards, and so Caleb, my son, kept one for a month as
Ah.
a trial, and it's like, if you can do good, I'll buy you one for your birthday. And so
If
he
you don't
bought it.
mind cleaning up poo-poos.
Yeah, that's the thing we said. It's
Oh,
like,
he
listen,
did go, yeah, like,
it's yours. You got to take
you're a
care of all of
cleaner.
it. Yeah.
Yep.
So
So I enjoy him. I've got my reef tank. I've kept things like giant praying mantises, stick insects. I think, because I grew up on a farm in rural Australia where I was surrounded by animals. And moving to the city when I went to college, you kind of feel like you lose that connection. So I've tried to sort of bring it with me a little bit and have your own private little rock pool and have the lizards and stuff hanging out with you.
okay, so you're in a city now. You kind of like in a condo or apartment.
I live in a share house. We rented a share house. It's like five of us. We rented like what would be a family home, and just to save
Oh,
costs, with
nice.
five of us in here, it's quite affordable. It's actually quite pleasant. We've got a garden. We like all work on together and stuff
That's
like
the
that.
thing in the U.S.
I
people
have
don't
seen
do.
a lot of artists struggling. I've seen that. Even in Australia, people like they're scared almost of having housemates. They're like living on their own, and then they end up paying all the money they earn in rent.
Right? Like,
Whereas I would definitely encourage freelance artists to share, because it allows you to pursue your projects because you can save so much money.
yeah,
And
and
during COVID, it's been a blessing because you're not alone. You've got people
yeah,
to talk to.
yeah, that would be a huge thing. And the thing here is like everybody wants to be individual and on their own and all that, and it's like that comes at a big cost.
Humans weren't really built for that, I don't think.
No, we're not.
Humans were communal, like obligately social primates.
Yeah,
I don't think living alone in an apartment was like the way nature intended.
yeah, yeah.
So
definitely not.
you're in the south, right?
Yes,
You're down south.
yes.
Are you in a city?
Yeah, I'm in
You
Tulsa,
might.
Oklahoma. I am from Seattle, Washington, though. I was born in California.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, moved to Seattle,
You've
Washington,
moved.
and
You've very big climactic shift, right?
yeah, yes,
Climatic shift.
and so yeah,
You moved from Bigfoot country to humidity.
yeah, and this is here in terms of history. This is where we
I
had
prefer
the
warmth.
uh, the land run. But I mean, this is where the Trail of Tears went for the Native Americans. Like, there's a lot of history
Is
here.
that the game every kid plays where you get dysentery?
Right. Yeah. The Oregon Trail. Yeah.
Or is it no? That's Oregon Trail.
Yeah. That one's different. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
people who are heading west, right? Was
Yeah.
that the Gold Rush
They're
or
heading
the
to
Settler
California.
Rush?
Both Gold and Settler
Of
Rush.
course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was the Trail of Tears I've heard of referenced, but was that to do with Native Americans?
Yeah,
Or
they
was
took-
it slavery based?
No, Native Americans. They made Native Americans move here, and then later they took all their land again, anyways.
Oh, of course. I remember with
yeah.
the Gold Rush, they're like, yeah, here's a bunch of treaties. And they're like, oh, we found gold. So, sorry.
Yeah. Nope.
Australia has a very similar history. I actually grew up
really?
in what was a Gold Rush town.
Really?
Yeah, I grew up in a place called Toongabbie. It used to like sell stuff to people heading to the gold fields, which were in the mountains behind us. So there was a big gold rush. Similar demographics, like big groups of Chinese folk came in to seek out gold, and then there was like ethnic conflict between the whites, and sort of similar thing played out on a smaller scale.
Oh yeah, it's
And
it's
then you've got all
interesting.
these rural towns now that are kind of don't have their purpose anymore.
Well, and it's interesting here because racism is such a big deal in the U.S. and we harp on it. And for where I'm at, there was a thing called the Tulsa Massacre, where they came in and it was
Yeah,
the
I've heard
only
of the Tulsa Massacre.
the only city or the only instance that I know of where the U.S. bombed its own citizens. Literally, the military came in and
Ooh.
bombed their own citizens, and it's a big deal here. They just had a thing. There's a documentary that's about to come out on it. There's only like 3 survivors
Oh,
left.
wow, okay.
Yeah, one of them is 107 years old, by the way. Like, this happened a long time ago, and they just tried to bury it. And we're literally, all of us in our 30s are like, why didn't we learn about this in school? Because we're just now
Like,
learning
oh,
about it.
that's why we didn't.
Yeah,
Because every country has their creation myth, don't they? And we learn
Yeah.
certain things. Like,
and
I was lucky enough that my school sort of embraced the dark side as well and taught us about a thing called the stolen generation, which you guys had a similar thing, Native American children taken and raised by religious groups or like
yeah,
adopted into families to try and dilute the race or whatever. So we had similar things. Luckily, we were taught a bit about that, but no, racism's incredibly prevalent in Australia as well, for
well,
sure.
that's what I'm interested in
We're
about
both
because, like,
colonies, of course.
well, in the U.S., like we focus on ours, and I was like, you do realize like every place has its thing, like something's happened.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Exactly.
we think it's an American only thing. I think that just most Americans just are very selfish, and we kind of look at ourselves as being the center point. More, I think that's an older generation thing. I think newer generations coming up realize that. That's
I
not
think
the
modern
case.
generation with the net and stuff,
Yeah,
there's much
yeah.
more communication.
But
between
looking
people.
around,
And the US is so big and so diverse that there's so many stories within the US that I guess you don't always need to look outside to see these amazing things.
yeah,
Because I
no,
live in Australia, there's like 22 million people maybe. So
Oh,
we look
wow.
outwards for our entertainment,
yeah,
we got like 5 major cities.
I think 22 million. Like
you
California
can
has more
count our
people.
cities.
Yeah,
Yeah, you've got states that have more people than our entire country,
Yeah.
and our country is massive.
yeah, it's huge.
Like all our major cities, you kind of have to fly between them. None of them are closer than 6 hours away from each other.
Oh wow.
Like there's maybe 5 or 6 major cities. You got the state capitals, then there's a bunch of small towns, but it's nothing like the US. And every city is impossible to buy houses in, of course.
Oh yeah, I bet.
Sort of like California level housing price stuff,
Oh man.
which again makes art interesting.
Right.
Because I was working on Subnautica. I think most of them were working in San Francisco.
Yeah, they had an
I-
office there,
I
which is now
believe.
closed. But I mean, Obrax is like, man, most of our dev
Did
team
COVID
is everywhere.
End up killing that?
Well, there was just no reason to go back from what he said. He's like, everybody's just working from home. He's
yeah,
like,
of course.
all right. I think
Because
he-
we were working with a team. We were working with folks from France. There
yeah,
were a couple of us from Australia. There was people in like Southeast Asia. Yeah.
and he did
It was
mention,
all
I think some of them kind of want to go back because it was that notion of like that's where you do get some social
There is
interaction.
a sense of community,
Yeah.
Like there is something I did like about working in studio, but the advantages of working from home are pretty significant, I think, especially in San Fran, where like housing prices and transport are a bit of a nightmare, you know.
Yeah, there's no way I could do it. Like where I live, like we just bought a home for 321,000, which is a big home here.
Mm-hmm.
If I went to back home to Seattle, if I went to California, if I went anywhere else, like
What about $1 million probably?
it's anywhere from 600 to 1.2, and it's just like I can't even afford to live in a house that fits all of us. Like I have to.
Yeah, the starting price for a small like a townhouse or like a small house in Melbourne is about 1.2 million, I think,
Oh
going
my
up to 5
goodness.
or so.
Oh man.
And that's Australian dollars. So yeah, like it's you just can't buy in the city basically. People buy apartments, I think still. They start around 500 grand, but no one really buys you can't really buy a house. I expect to be renting for a rather long time because we don't have the US has such a diversity of cities where there's cities where you can afford to live.
Yeah.
Like I know Detroit had the huge economic downturn, which means there are properties that people can buy.
Yeah.
But in Australia, there's no like urban decay city. The cities are all kind of similar-ish. So I hope you've got your $1.2 million in your pocket, you know.
Right.
Or
Or
I
you're
know
gonna have to
Silicon
work
Valley and
just to pay
stuff
that off.
is,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Or you get like a high-powered like business job or something like that. I found
Yeah.
share housing to be very useful in that respect.
Yeah, that's and I especially when you don't have kids and stuff like that, like why wouldn't you? Like you said, you
I
get the
think, yeah, I
community
sort of
side, like
half deliberately decided that because I don't think I could maintain my lifestyle if I had dependents, basically.
yeah.
Because, you know, work can dry up for 6 months and then, you know, when you have kids, you kind of have to put them first, right?
Yeah. Stuff's got to be done. So,
It's like, yeah.
man, we went so much longer than I thought we were going to go. But it's been really good
Well,
talking to you.
I hope we didn't go too far off topic. I'm certainly
No,
happy to
I think
answer
that
any
was
questions you have
awesome.
about Subnautica, but
Yeah. And well, what I want
yeah,
to do
hopefully
now,
there's some interesting personal stuff.
yeah, well, what I want to do now, like, tell us about like where people can find you. I know you got that upcoming book. So
Hmm.
any social media
God
handles,
willing.
any stuff that you have coming out that's coming up that you want to tell us about to kind of finish it out.
Absolutely. I think I'm most active now on Twitter. I think lots and lots of like lots of artists have moved to Twitter. So I'm at Alex Ries Art at Twitter, and Ries is spelt with Ries. No one gets the pronunciation right. That's quite okay. I don't think even I would have if I read it. So Alex Ries Art on Twitter. I have my own website, which is just alexreese.com, and I'm on ArtStation. And let me just double check what I call myself there, but I believe it's pretty much the same. ArtStation, just Alex Ries, if you search that. And I have a Patreon, which people are free to join. I upload like the really high resolution stuff as well as art. I just don't post anywhere else on Patreon. And my Patreon, if you want to visit that, is. Oh, it's making me log on. Okay, continue with Google.
So with that, what's the one if like let's say somebody sees something like I want to buy a print or I want to get that piece of artwork. Is there one that they can do that?
Mm-hmm. If you want to buy a print, I don't have a print service set up at the moment. So what I usually do, you say the print, and I charge a basically tiny cost to give you the super high resolution file.
Okay.
And if you just send me a DM or something, I'll send you the file and you can print it up. But if you think it's worth it, I could. Like I know some people use Redbubble, right? I've got a few things up on Redbubble, and I
I've never
believe
actually heard of that.
ArtStation is setting up its own print service. Yeah, exactly. It's hard to know. It's hard to know which ones. I never get a lot of traction, so I might do a little bit of sleuthing. I think you're going to find most of my stuff on Twitter and on my normal website. I do post some stuff on Instagram, but basically just Google Alex Ries. I'm pretty much the only person on earth with that ridiculous name, and you'll end up tracking me down.
Well, when you said the
And my
pronunciation, my first thought was Terminator. Kyle Reese.
Kyle Reese.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I should just use that as in Reese, as in Kyle Reese,
Yeah.
as in the savior of mankind.
Right.
And if you just go, yeah, here we go, Patreon, it's just Alex on Patreon. You'll know it's me because the icon is that big human god creature that became a meme template, much to my delight.
Well, awesome. That's going to round this one out. I want to thank you so much for doing this for me and, yeah, taking an hour and a half out of your day just to talk to me. So I really appreciate it.
No, fantastic. It was an absolute pleasure. And if anyone has any other questions, just knock me up on Twitter. I'm quite happy to answer anything.
Awesome. Well, thank you,
I
sir.
look forward to seeing it up.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And thank you. See you later.
All right, so that is the video. A special thank you to Alex, of course, for doing the interview. I tried to jam as many of his images from the game into this interview. I'm going to make sure that all of his handles are in the description. So Twitter, Instagram, any of his websites that he mentioned, I'll make sure that those are in the description, as well as any videos that I used or clips from those videos that I used in this one. Like the one showcasing the early development of Subnautica. That is a phenomenal video, and I'll make sure that, like I said, all of those are actually in the description as well. So if you like the video, hit the like button for me. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, hit the subscribe button for me. Thanks so much for watching.